Although weeping lasted all night, I know that joy comes in the morning. Although weeping lasted all night, I know that joy comes in the morning light. So I march on to a new song, 'cause I've been marching to that old one way too long. And I gotta move on and take new steps every day, 'cause I know there is got to be another way. And I'm brighter day, so I march on.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Pure Lives. Tonight, we are going to deal with a touchy topic, but with a very positive twist. And we are going to have Drs. Aaron and Margaret Jamal join in on the conversation. Today's special guest is Minister Joseph McNeal. He's actually a youth leader at our church. That live in Grace. And I'm excited to have him on the show. He is also an officer of the law, so I'm going to bring him in and
function.
Welcome Minister Joseph McNeal.
Hello, good evening, praise God.
Good evening. And I think I'm still waiting on Dr. Aaron and Margaret Jamal. So thank you again so much for joining in on this.
Thank you for having me.
I really truly appreciate it. Okay, they're going to be joining in without camera with the conversation. So I'll bring them in as well. All right. So, Dr. Aaron and Margaret Jamal, are you there? Okay, I don't hear them yet. So today I called this show Black and Blue, A People in Turmoil. And the reason, I think it's pretty obvious to people that pay attention to anything that's going on today.
Absolutely.
But I feel like you are in a unique position, being also, African American and also an officer of the law. So I'm very grateful that you are able to come on and talk to us. So first of all, I want everybody to know and understand something about Minister Joseph McNeal. This officer of the law has been with us as part of the fight. This is something that he participated in the fight that I have up. He has joined in on the march here to success. So I just want you to know who you're dealing with when we start this conversation. So Mr. McNeal, first of all, I would like you to go ahead and introduce yourself. Let everybody know who you are.
Absolutely. Good evening. How everybody doing? Thank you for joining me. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate you, Asia. This is a great opportunity. This is probably my fourth social media meeting relating to race and policing in our community. This is extremely divisive times right now. I born and raised single parent home in poverty, Section 8, South Side Chicago. I served in the military for 4 years, and I became a police officer shortly after that in 2002. So I've been a police officer for 18 years. I do have to admit, when I became a police officer, I wasn't woke at all. I had no understanding of the historical ramifications of the African American community in relationship to policing, and I didn't really understand what I had gotten myself into, to be perfectly honest. Not to mention, my own personal life was in turmoil, and while I was dealing with my own issues, I ran to my spiritual father, who Michael D. Reynolds, who blessed me, and I became a parishioner, a minister, uh, all forms of. In the 17 years I attended New Life Celebration, and became a minister there, and was confronted by a Pastor France about 2 years ago while preaching at a police officer authority forum at church. And he's like, "Oh, you're a preacher." And we formed a relationship. And soon after that, I became a youth minister at Living Grace Church in Linwood, Illinois.
Wow. That's not a lot.
But not to
Okay.
mention, as you can see, it says Joe Speaks Hope. So I started motivational speaking, where I go from predominantly through the District 148 area, that's Riverdale, Dalton, Harvey, through different schools, high schools, and churches, just trying to speak hope into the lives of our Black youth. Hope actually stands for heaven on planet Earth. So I was trying to be creative there, but I've been doing that for a couple of years now. So that's been very exciting. Obviously, with COVID, I haven't been able to do much motivational speaking, but thank God I can still preach the word of God and living grace. So I'm very grateful.
Amen. Which also makes you unique, because you preach the word of God, you live by it. So I imagine that has something to do with how you approach today's time. So let's get into it.
Absolutely.
So in dealing with everything that's been going on, I want to know, first of all, have you found it challenging being both African American and a police officer in this time?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking me that. Yes, I can give an emphatic yes. But the reality is, this didn't just start for me personally. We spoke earlier, and I was talking about the Michael Brown incident, and I shared that that's kind of our new Emmett Till, if you will, for this new social justice movement. And it was Michael Brown. Then you had obviously not you had Tamir Rice. You had the gentleman killed by Mr. Zimmerman, and you had all these things happening, and it's heartbreaking. Because as an African American, I have 5 children. I have 3 sons and 2 daughters. 4 of my children are adults. And at the time when this first started, I saw my children in these young men's lives who had died. I saw my family members. I saw loved ones. I saw young men and women that in the community that I served, and it was very heartbreaking. And to be perfectly honest, I had gone several times to my pastor at the time, who's now my spiritual father, and said, "Listen, I don't want to do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. This is too hard. This is too hard to do this job and try to build relationships and rapport when now I understand the history that I'm dealing with police in the African American community. I understand the institutional racism and its effects. I understand how, as African Americans, how we are oppressed. And now I feel I'm on the wrong side of this fight." So it was very, very difficult. It was very, very heartbreaking. As a matter of fact, there was times I had to take counseling for it because I just didn't know how to deal with it. So it was extremely difficult.
Yeah, that sounds extremely challenging. Have people accused you of being on the wrong side?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You get the whole gamut. It's interesting being called a racist by an African American when you're an African American, right? And I have been called that. So that's a very, very interesting dynamic. So, how do you build relationship? How do you move forward? How do you show that my uniform does not display my heart? It does not display who I am. And the reality is, that's many officers that do this job well, that risk their lives, that have been injured doing this job, they still face the same ramifications. That's Black, white, Hispanic, regardless. And they're trying to find a way. How do I show that I'm not this officer that killed this young man unjustifiably? I'm not the officers that did something in Minnesota. I'm not the officers that did something in New York. I'm not the officer from Chicago that shot a young man 15 times. I'm not that person. And it becomes overwhelmingly challenging at times.
So, in dealing with all of this, and as I showed everybody in the beginning, that you are assisting in the fight, what do you think, in your opinion, is going wrong in the system in regards to the bad relationship between the minority community and the police?
Sure. So one, in my opinion, first we have to deal with the historical context. We have to deal with the reality that law enforcement in the African American experience started in a very oppressive, a very negative way, where we weren't treated as human beings. That's just the reality. That's how it started. When you start talking about slavery and slave runners, and you're literally running from your life, that the fear that comes over you when you see law enforcement. Then you fast forward to after slavery and Jim Crow and the Ku Klux Klan, who were really acting as this unofficial police department, right? If we be honest about it, the Ku Klux Klan was terrorizing African American communities, forcing them back into this inferior place, right? So you continue to fast forward, and now it becomes law, segregation. You white only. You can't go to school here. You can't buy a home here, right? So now something that was unofficial becomes official in Jim Crow and segregation. Move forward to the civil rights movements, where you see church-going folks being hosed down and attacked by dogs and beat up by police officers on horseback, right? We cannot escape that history when it comes to the relationship with police and African Americans. So understanding that history, and how do we move forward? Well, there's a lot of ideas out here, like defunding the police and reallocating funds or police reform. I actually don't disagree with any of that, to be perfectly honest. I'm very comfortable with social services coming over and helping me doing my job. I'll be real. Anybody that's done this job long enough, we're asking for all the help we can get, because the reality is the job is still very dangerous, even for good cops. Having said that, in my opinion, I think the quickest solution to real cultural change is that, and you showed me a video, which I agree with the young woman said, that everyone must be involved in policing. Specifically, we need police officers from every walk of life, gender, race, class, to be police officers. Because the only way you can change a culture is to be a part of the culture. Don't get me wrong, laws are great, accountability is wonderful, but we're talking about a deep-rooted systemic problem. And laws and policies are not going to root it out, at least not in this generation. I just don't believe that. I believe you need people of goodwill, people who are moral, people who are conscious, that actually are in the uniform to change the environment, to change the culture, to give the policing a new face. That's for the immediate. I think you can have real change if that happens. Unfortunately, with a lot of anti-police rhetoric that's going on, and listen, it's rhetoric that's well-deserved. I'm not here to tell people how to feel about how their experience was with police. I am a police officer that had a gun put to my head after he found out I was a police officer. I'm a police officer that was pulled out of my car in Chicago, put in handcuffs after they found out I was a police officer. So I'm the last one to come to say, oh no, this isn't happening. Oh yes, it is. I've experienced it firsthand. I'm talking about after. What's funny, in my experience, I've never experienced police brutality or mistreatment by the police before I became a cop. After I became a cop, I started having all these poor experiences as a police officer. So it's really ironic, you know. So absolutely, I think in the forefront, we need people from all walks of life to actually put this uniform on and be a part of a cultural shift and a cultural change.
Okay. So you do advise Black women to join the police force as well?
You better believe I need Black women, white women. We need people from all over. I'm be honest, someone like me is very lonely. Okay, this is very lonely. If you can imagine being an African American man that's a Christian, I'm talking all the Christians out there, you know that we are distinct, we are peculiar and different, and sometimes that can get lonely. Sometimes you can be marginalized and ostracized for your beliefs. Well, imagine being an African American Christian that's a cop. This is a very, very lonely place, right? I'm reaching out to anybody. I see somebody that's a believer like me that wear this uniform and they're African American. Listen, I don't want to let them go because this is lonely. I feel like I'm in this fight so oftentimes all by myself because it's not just the title African American police officer and Christian, but it's actually practicing it. It's actually living this thing out. It's actually being able to be mistreated and to respond in a way that is pleasing to God, right? Not only is that not easy for me to do, I got to be all afraid of, but to ask that of other people, even if they do profess Christianity, that's a whole different ball of wax because they have emotions, they're angry, and they're not accustomed to walking in their Christianity as a police officer. So I'm begging. Listen, it's a hard job. I get it. I'm with you, but it does pay well. Please come. Help.
I guess somebody didn't hear you say in the beginning how long you've been on the force.
I've been on the force for 18 years, since 2002.
18 years.
I was 22 years old.
I'm trying to think. I'm absolutely sure I've never been anywhere for more than 10 years. I've never been anywhere for more than 5 years, I don't think. That's a long time.
Yeah, I consider this my exile, my Moses exile. I'm in the wilderness. This is how I look at it. I'm in the wilderness. I just killed an Egyptian, you understand? And now I'm in the wilderness. I've been exiled, y'all, so I can't wait to come back home.
So here's another question. How do you feel about the Black Lives Matter movement?
I think the Black Lives Matter movement have done a phenomenal job leading this charge for social justice. I think they don't get the credit that they deserve. I'll give a personal story. I have been asking for a body camera for at least 10 years. I am not exaggerating. I have been asking for a body camera for 10 because I'm a big guy. I'm 6'4". I'm 300 pounds now, okay? I would rather be lighter, but I'm not a small man. I'm not a small man. and oftentimes, I would be accused of doing things that I didn't do. And I was begging for, but I started recording stuff on my cell phone just to have the protections to say, no, I didn't do that. I didn't do what I'm being accused of doing, right? Because I mean, I'll be honest, you're not gonna whoop me. You know what I'm saying? So you got to find some other way to deal with me. You know, so I get lighter. You know, so Black Lives Matter spearheaded that. It was by the efforts of Black Lives Matter, and as a believer, I believe that as believers, we don't have to be in 100% agreement. I've had this conversation several times. Stokely Carmichael and Martin Luther King walked together while being diametrically opposed in ideology. One was saying Black power, the other was saying nonviolence. They did not agree, but what they did agree was on a goal for justice and progress for the African American community. So in that vein, listen, Black Lives Matter, I'm all over it. If we're going to be walking for justice for the African American community, and we're going to be walking for civility and humanity, I'm all over it. Listen, where's the t-shirt? Because we must come together and unify because our children are dying. Our communities are being destroyed. We can no longer stand by and say, well, because I don't agree with you 100%, you're my enemy 100%. I don't agree with that. I don't think believers agree with that. When we have one goal, we must walk together in that goal.
I completely agree with you. So let me ask, and I've heard so many different arguments in regards to why things have gone down, the shootings have gone down, the situations where there's clear over aggression in the approach in dealing with the minorities. Is there something in regards to the training that you guys have that puts you in that position where you feel you have to do that? Are there just several bad apples that are making the force look bad? I mean, tell me what you feel is going on in that situation, why it is repetitive and having all of these incidents.
Sure, that's an excellent question. So at the root of this, again, we cannot deny white supremacy and its tentacles that reach through every facet of our American democracy. We know that's the reality. If you don't know that, you need to understand the history of this country. You got to read about it. This is what's been manifested in our reality, right? So that's a huge part of what we're seeing. People argue that, speaking about Mr. Trump for a second, people would argue, well, that's not important who's the president, and it's not important. He's not as important as far as how it's affecting our community. The reality is, words are important, and words from leaders, arguably the most powerful leader in the world, is extremely important. And when words can galvanize and encourage violence and hate and prejudice and discrimination, we got to take note of that. And I think this is a large part of what this overt, this kind of movement toward this thing becoming more repetitive. My oldest brother, Paul James, will always tell me, Joe, this thing ain't never go away. It's just being filmed. So I don't think it ever went away, but I do believe there has been an uptick since we had our first Black president, when everybody thought we was living in a utopia and racism was gone forever. We found out soon after, right? There were a lot of mad people out there. There was a lot of very angry people, right? And this is really when this kind of uptick started, right? When Barack Obama, shortly after he becomes president. Then now we have the police that we have now, who says that the racists that were attacking peaceful protesters were good people. They were just good people. When you have this type of rhetoric, when he will call Black Lives Matter a terrorist group, but he won't condemn the KKK, he won't condemn the white nationalists, he won't condemn the alternative right, he won't condemn that and the violence that they've done, he won't condemn the extreme right, but he will condemn and label the Black Lives Matter, and by any means necessary, he'll label them terrorists. This is a problem in our country. So I think that definitely poured some gasoline on what we're seeing now. Then when we deal with the individual departments and police officers, it's become much more multifaceted. Because while there is the issue of racism, there is also an issue of traumatic experiences. And we don't talk enough about post-traumatic stress when it comes to police officers. Don't get me wrong, I am not in any way trying to diminish or dismiss the effects of white supremacy and how that has elevated and escalated police brutality. I'm not trying to say that, please don't misunderstand me. But we do have officers that work in very dangerous places in our country that have had their lives threatened, who have been through shooting, who have been through near-death situations, and quite frankly, they've been traumatized. Now, scientifically, trauma is in the brain. So they might have survived. They might have left without a scratch, but that doesn't mean they weren't changed. I can speak to this because I experienced it personally. I've had 2 broken hands. I've had a broken wrist. I've been in 3 shootings. I've had an ankle broken. I've had my leg broken. I've been hit by a car, and I have back problems and neck problems. I know what it means to go through a life-altering experience where I was fighting for my life, and it changed me forever. So I dealt with PTSD. I dealt with depression, right? I had an ex-wife who no longer wanted to wait for the phone call that I was dead. Now, this is the experience of some of our police officers, and this is what they're going through. And let me share with this: the administrators don't care, because if you say, "Well, I need some help," well, that's one person that's off work. See, this is still a job like Walmart, like Target, like anywhere else you work in the world. So now somehow they have to replace that person. Well, that costs money. They don't want to have it cost money. So they would prefer someone that is dealing with some form of emotional or mental trauma to go back on the street with a gun on their hip and police. So when we start talking about police reform, listen, wow. Come on, somebody. You preaching to the choir right here. I ain't lying, because this is messed up, right? So here's an issue with having a poor experience, right? Now, when we start talking about police training, I think that's another very, very good question. I showed you a video where there was a traffic stop, and this is a white man who kills another white police officer. For me, I've been in office for 18 years. I'm 41 years old. It still traumatizes me today. Now, the first time I ever seen that video was in the police academy, and I was 22 years old. If you don't believe that changed the way I thought about how I was going to do my job, you're very, very wrong. When you see a police officer who's actually trying to be professional, who's screaming because he's being murdered, but by someone over a traffic citation, it completely changes your perspective and your outlook on what this job entails. I'm gonna tell you the truth. After I saw that, I should have ran for the hills. Should have been a fireman, something. I should have did something else. I'll be honest with you, But so the answer really is multifaceted. You have white supremacy, you have police training, you have police culture, and they all kind of mixed into this really horrible ball. And now go police with a gun in your hip and try to police a community where they're having their own struggle, right? Communities where there's poverty, communities where there's violence, community where the crime is high, but the jobs are low. We know that in these communities, there are more police, there are more instances where police brutality exists, right? So it really becomes this Pandora's box. I mean, that's just ready to explode. So when you think of it on these terms, I mean, it's almost like, and I'm not trying to down talk this, but it's almost as if you ask the question, I'm surprised these things don't happen even more.
That's rough. Martin Jamal was asking, are you still active on the force?
I'm still very active on the force. I went to work today. I ain't going to work tomorrow because I got to prepare for a message Sunday. But yes, I'm still on the force.
So here's an interesting question. What would you do faced with a situation seeing white police using excessive force?
I've been in those situations. I've stepped in front of many guns aimed at somebody else by a police officer. My wife ain't gonna want to hear this, but I've done this on a regular basis. When you're a police officer, you know who the bad apple is. When you're a police officer, I'm talking white or black, you know who the racist is. You know. You spend a little bit too much time around each other not to know. And oftentimes, the best you can do, because there's so many forces that are at work, political forces, to protect this individual, what ends up happening, and I'm glad you asked this question, what ends up happening to the good officer, because all too often people say, where are the good cops? I'll tell you where the good cops are. They quit, they get fired, they get harassed, they get called disenchanted, lazy. They get, I've dealt with all of that. They get put on midnight shift because you're a bad apple, because you keep interfering with good police work. This is what happens with the good officer. And listen, that's if they're lucky. If they're unlucky, they get set up and ambushed by their own coworkers and murdered. This is what happens to good police officers. So this again, why I bring back this question when people say, what will help and fix this thing? We need more good police officers.
Okay, so let's bring it back a little bit.
Sure.
we were dealing with the whole PTSD situation, and you mentioned a white officer dealing with a white male that was coming after him. Um, but what I'm trying to understand, and maybe you've answered it and it's not clear,
Sure.
why does it seem like the like they feel like the African American people are more threatening? So in that situation that you're talking about, I did see the video. I just felt like my viewers should not look at the video. Um, in that situation, the man was coming for him with a gun. Very scary situation, terrifying. I couldn't even imagine being placed in the situation. In some of the situations that we've seen, however, when these men and women are being killed, like for example, the situation where the man informs the officer, I do have a weapon, let him know where he is. He's asking for ID. You can't get your ID without moving. He's being very polite. Everybody's being very polite. And then, all of a sudden the officer can freak out. Don't touch the gun. Don't go for the gun, and shoots him. So what is it, or is it, uh, about African Americans that seem to be so threatening? Are we threatening to them, or is this all about their own white supremacist attitude?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. Sure. I think you have to go back to white supremacy and social engineering. Jane Elliott, who's a social justice, racism educator, she says that if you are white and you are raised in America and you're not a racist, you're a miracle, right? So what is she saying? She's saying that the social engineering, she's saying that the communications, media, TV, education, all of them inform the American. It is not just a white American. It's every American. It informs the American that the African American is inferior. It informs the American that the African American is lawless. It informs America the African American is the dredge of our culture. He cannot be trusted. As a matter of fact, it informs the American that we are natural criminals. This is what America. So I am very grateful for white people who actually are on our side to fight against white supremacy, because they're fighting against a natural inclination. They're fighting against something that they've been taught and they've learned their entire lives. And this is the issue of white supremacy and institutional racism, that it gives you the message. Now, how do you unplug from the message when you've been taught your whole life that something's wrong with people of color, especially Black people? What do? In my opinion, the best you can do is educate yourself. The best you can do is build relationships with people on the other side and get to know them. The best you could do is refrain from allowing these messages to continue to reverberate in your own mind, and start to educate yourself and inform yourself that these are lies, these are false narratives, and it's not the truth.
Okay. We have a question. So why are the bad apples still active on the board?
Sure. So again, back to the bad apple conversation. You have men in the bad apples are protected by a very powerful union, a very politically powerful union, right? So, and let me also add this, back to white supremacy and institutional racism. The history of policing was, with the African American community, was to keep the Black folk in their community. You stay over there. We're going to be over here. You stay over there. That same type of policing exists. That same type of policing that, no, this is not where you belong, Negro. You belong on the Black side of town. That still exists. And you have administrators, you have people in positions of influence and power that want that type of policing. They want residents to feel safe. They want their opportunity to look good and have no crime. So here's one tentacle of white supremacy, that you use policing to maintain the status quo. Now, obviously, we have other tentacles like education, like housing, right? Like jobs, right? But here's the one we're talking about, is police brutality and very effective racist policing.
Hmm. This, from what it is that you're telling me, it sounds like a bit of a hopeless situation. What what can be done to actually effectively minimize these horrible uh, situations of violence in regards to racism? If you're saying that, well, they're embedded in them, so this is just who they are, and they're protected on a force. I mean, we're fighting to get things changed, but in your opinion, will it?
Again, I think there's a number of things you can do. Again, we talked about police reform. We talked about defunding the police, which I receive that as reallocating resources to other services where police officers don't come to non-violent, non-criminal calls as frequently. I think that's really important. I've seen what town was it? Well, it wasn't Minnesota. It was another town. It was actually a number of towns, California and some other towns, that actually did pass these laws to these policies, so that police officers don't come to calls relating to drug addiction, homelessness, just petty violations, and more so social services calls, which I think is a very positive thing, because that's less interaction with somebody with a gun, right? So because the reality is, every fight a police officer in, it's a gunfight, because he brings the gun. So you need the police officer to come as less frequently to calls that he's not needed, neighbor complaints and things like that. You don't need somebody with a gun to show up. You need maybe somebody from housing, you need somebody else to help and deal with that. That's somebody with a gun. So I think that's really, really important. The other part is, again, you got to have people from every walk of life. Listen, how is it that it's okay in a predominantly white community, or even all white community, that all the police officers are white? Most of the local government officials are white, and that's fine, and it's all good. Why don't we have that in predominantly African American communities? Why don't the government employees mirror the community that they serve? That still boggles my mind. If you're in a community that's 98% black, the government employees, including police, should be 98% black. If you're in a community that's 100% African American, that's what it should be. Is that going to completely eradicate police brutality? Absolutely not, because you got some African Americans that are also bad apples. I'm sorry to tell you guys that, but that's the truth. But it will greatly decrease these numbers. It will greatly tear these numbers down. And because now I'm more encouraged to speak up and not have to deal with consequences, that this person is protected by administrators and by a union. That now I will be the bad apple, because I spoke up against him, because I spoke out against police brutality, which I have personally experienced. So we need more of us. We need more people of goodwill, more conscious brothers and sisters. So you brothers and sisters out there, 30 years old and younger, you need a job, you just got out of college, come on over here and hang out with us. Hey, it's a good job. You ain't got to stay. You can still, finish school, make a good living, and get this experience, but also be a part of a cultural change, a cultural transformation, and a cultural shift.
I never really thought about the community mirroring that in regards to police department and government. That's an interesting approach, and it does make sense.
Not in the black community.
Right. It does make sense. So with all of these things going on, with all of these different ideas, and we know that this is really not a new problem.
No, it's not. Correct.
Are Are there other officers like you that are fighting alongside you in this fight and trying to get things better?
There are several. As a matter of fact, we were out at Living Grace Church yesterday passing out food as a food depository, and we had officers. Myself had officers from Flossmoor, African American, and a couple of even white officers who was out there as well. So we have officers that are on the front. But here's the truth: they won't be on the news. The good that they do will not be caught on the news. I'm grateful for Southtown that put out a nice um, um, article for what we were doing out there and actually mentioned the officers that were out there. That mentioned I had actually my nephews with me who were wearing Black Lives Matters t-shirts, right? And they actually mentioned it in the article. What's up, Josiah? What's going on? So they mentioned that, but you have this night that's not going to catch national news. That's not going to be on 9 o'clock news. They're not going to show that because you can't sensationalize it. You can't create. You ain't going to get great ratings over these nice feel good stories. You're not going to get the stories of all the time. Many times an officer risked his life, a white officer, for someone African American. They're not going to show that. They're going to show in the news, in the media. What you're going to see is the opposite.
Yes, I can attest to that. I've definitely seen a lot of horrible stuff. And I think there's reasons for that. I mean, there's a couple reasons for that, but I do feel like um, they're trying to put more so in the forefront of what's going on because I feel like, like you mentioned, the leader of the country is making light of what's going on. And it's like, the more that he says what he says and trying to make light, then it's like, well, we feel like we gotta shout louder. We feel like we have to make more noise. We feel like we have to, no, this is not okay. We are not okay. This
Right.
is what's going on. More and more and more and more. So I feel like as you do what you're doing, and you have other people alongside of you that maybe I don't know. I don't want it to be a publicity stunt, so to speak, but maybe let people know what you're doing and then invite people to join in with you. I don't know if you're doing that already, you probably are, but I'd be willing to assist in that. So we can all be more on a positive front and united front in dealing with this. Because it's exhausting. It's exhausting to keep saying the same stuff, keep fighting the same fight, and then feel like you're not being heard. And I know you understand that.
Absolutely.
Are you have you ever felt like there were people on your team, your force, your people that were against you for doing what you're doing?
That I work with.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Again, I wear my Christianity on my sleeve. I don't hide it. I'm not a CIA Christian. I'm not a Secret Service Christian. So I definitely put it that on the out there on the out front. And I certainly have seen the stickers and the stares and the comments like I'm not going to be Mr. Nice Guy, which are meant for me. They're not meant for the citizens. They're meant specifically for me. Oh yeah, I see them, and it's interesting. One again, I'm not a small person. I'm not a coward in any way. So most times for me, these individuals won't come say things to my face, okay? Because one, what they know they're doing is wrong, but it's acceptable. So they got to keep it covert, okay? So that's it's wrong, but it's covert and it's acceptable and protection, right? So I faced that several times. It becomes a part of who you are. When you believe in something, it's who you are, right? I cannot not be who I am. I cannot not be someone that don't care about other people. Even people that make mistakes, even people that may need to be arrested. That don't mean they need to be murdered. That don't mean that I need to beat them to a bloody pulp. What they did was wrong. That's what the court system is for. You understand what I'm saying? Now I'm all for every individual defending themselves. We all have a right for self-preservation. However, there is a line. And as a police officer, you know what the line is. Now, whether you adhere to it or not, you're making a personal decision. You didn't lose control. You knew what you were doing when you did it. And it's unfortunate, though, that these individuals are protected. And again, this is a very, very lonely quest. This is a very, very lonely quest that I often feel, and I'm so grateful that I have my family to support me, that I have my church that supports me, that I have so many good friends that know who I am and support me. But this is very, very lonely. I'm being real transparent, okay? You know, for those of you out there, if you're not like on your way to retirement, I'm so serious. You know what I'm saying? Man, applications. I mean, because this rough. I'm sorry. You know, it's rough. And we got, like, for instance, we got some new guys recently, right? African American. 3 of them, no, 4. 4 of them are African American. One is 2 are Hispanic. So we got some guys. And who are you? No, I know your name. I know you the police, but who are you in your heart? See, I won't know that, because folk can talk a good game. I won't know who they are, how they really feel about the people that they're serving, until this moment of excitement happens, until this moment of hostility, this moment of violence, until it happens. And now I get to see, and they constrain themselves. So I never know who I'm in a relationship with, relating to. Is this a person that's conscious, a person of goodwill, a person that actually wants to make a difference and serve the people for the sake of the people, not for the sake of themselves? So I need some conscious, goodwill, Christian brothers and sisters, you know, to become police officers. Because in my opinion, I'll keep saying it till I'm blue in the face. If you want the quickest change, you need people there that can come and change the culture.
Yes, that's a good point. I mean, if you have the same old people that are feeling the same old way, that were trained the same old way, think the same old way, then you're going to do the same old thing.
And then and let me add this, even if you have someone that may not be as courageous as me, well, they'll just fall in line because they don't want to deal with the problems. They don't want to deal with the harassment. They don't want to lose their job. They don't want to deal with the consequences. I've been a police officer 18 years. I'm on my way out the door. I don't care about no consequences. Bring them on. You know, I got one more baby. I got one more baby. He's 13. He's taller than I am. I got one more. You know, he got to go to college and everything like that. But listen, I'm gonna be all right. You know, bring him on. I'm not going to compromise the courage of my convictions for comfort. I'm just not going to do it. That's just who I am, who God made me to be. But it would be nice. I tell you, it will be nice to see some young 20-something-year-olds coming through the door that are like-minded, that are willing to also take that stand.
Yeah. I'm not sure if Dr. and Jamal can be heard yet.
Can you hear me?
I hear you. Go ahead,
okay.
Dr. Jamal.
Yep, I am here. Yeah. How you doing, Joe? I appreciate your testimony and what it is that you represent. I'd like to bring a different side to things, because it seems as though you are knowledgeable about the systemic impact that has happened with regard to the way not only white supremacy has framed the culture, in the country, but even in the police force, or I should say, especially within the police force.
Absolutely.
The challenges we have with a an entity that is supposedly paid for by our tax dollars that is positioned supposedly to actually be a protector, when in essence we actually see the police force too often as predators. There is a very serious problem there, because if you have no trust for those that are being paid or positioned with power, with weapons, with the weight of the law to protect you, if you have no trust in that, then you begin to take things either in your own hands, or you begin to, as you said, go undercover to do whatever it is that you're trying to do to survive. The challenges that I see is that I've seen whole lives ruined as a result of an ambitious, overreacting officer who decides to make an example of someone. And that son, that husband, that daughter is now marked for the rest of their life. And their family has to deal with that loss. Even though they weren't killed, they're still scarred for the rest of their lives. Now, that's not just the police, that's the judicial system as well. But the police officers are often being used as that outreaching arm to then capture blacks and then put them into the system. That's a sad thing to be a part of. So when you put this thing out there of join, I have a hard time imagining somebody that I care about, somebody that I love, being victimized by something I belong to.
Sure, I think that's a great point in perspective, and I definitely appreciate that. And so there's some things we do have to, while you tell your truth, let's tell the other side of the truth. Let's tell the whole truth. We know that in communities of color all over this country, we have issues with poor education, joblessness, poverty, and violence. That's a reality. And these are also some of the effects of white supremacy. So it's interesting to me that we know this exists. We know the violence is being perpetrated by some of those that live in our community. And we know we need protection. Our single parents, our children, our elderly, they need protection from somebody. Now, I get it. There's an issue with mistrust. I'm with you. I've worked very, very hard as a police liaison, as a community service liaison, trying to rebuild that trust. It is sometimes an impossible task. So I got involved in that in order to do something about rebuilding the trust, because I understand without trust, it's impossible for me to do my job, right? We know that the motto of no snitching is directly related to a bad relationship with the police. We know that the experience of mass incarceration, right? We understand this very, very fully, right? At the same time, what is the response to the victim who was carjacked, to the elderly mom whose doors kicked in, to the child that has to be in the crossfire of gunfire? What's the response? What's the reaction? What do we do? I would love an answer, because I'm all ears. I would really love an alternative, because you're right. This thing ain't working. let's just keep it plain. No, this thing ain't working. All right. So
what we need then is
alternative, because we know while we talk about something like social services, it's not their job to respond to somebody shooting at them. How do you tell someone that they're going to deal with someone with mental illness? Hey, oh yeah, by the way, you got to deal with the person shooting at you. That's not their job. They're not equipped for that. At the same time, we have an issue with trust with the police. So I really believe that you're in the right area. I'm with you. We're on the same team, whether you know it or not. I would love to know what is my alternative. What is the alternative for those that are being victimized, that are afraid to leave their home? And that ain't got nothing to do with the police, because I grew up in an environment like that. So I would love to know what's the answer, because we need one. I think today is in our time right now, I think more people are willing to listen to an alternative than ever before, because this thing ain't working. So you're right. I agree with you. I'm on board. I'm with you. I'm lock stop with you. There is a trust issue that does not allow the police to be the police. Where do we go from here?
Let me answer that.
Sure.
I believe that what we need is community mindedness, a transformative model, if you will, where neighbors begin to actually take care of neighbors, and in that begin to bring up people that are taught to take care of neighbors, to actually taught to defend one another and actually seek to help one another rather than to victimize one another. That's something that is done through generations. You can't do it overnight because this thing has been inbred in the community for so long that it's going to take time. But unless it is that people are actually inspired, motivated, and encouraged to do that, it's not going to happen. Far too often, the one that had the most leverage in the community to actually bring about that kind of a community networking, where we actually working together, talking together, doing things together, having fun together, that's the one that is targeted, and then he winds up with a record and inefficient to be able to do anything because he can't afford to do anything. He's got a parole officer that's telling him, if you do this one more time, you're done. Right? And so if we stop targeting our leaders, those it is that are and those who want to be, and we start empowering them to actually become the model, if you will, of connecting with one another, protecting one another, serving one another, then we have the chance for the community to take care of one another. It's not we're setting ourselves up to war against guns that have been filtered into the community by somebody who is not the community.
Right. You're right. You're right.
We need less of the guns, to put it lightly. We need less of the police involvement, and we need more of the community mindedness that says we're going to take care of one another. When that happened, and the history does show that African Americans did survive and do well, prospered as a community when we were left to do it alone. The problem is that when that happened, they came and actually killed us, those that were leaders, and then actually set us against one another's, pitted us against one another so that we would be fighting one another's rather than helping one another.
No, I agree 100%, and I appreciate you sharing that. I had a conversation. I'm an optimist. I don't know how not to have hope. It's called Joe Speaks Hope for a reason. I got loads of it. That's probably why I'm still here. At the same time, I spoke to a brother, one of my brothers, Christian brother. He's a musician. Jason Jones, what's up, doctor? And we're talking about we need another Black Wall Street. We need to start reinvesting back in a new Black Wall Street, and not just one. You got to start with one, obviously, but you have them all over the country, places that are safe zones for people of color. That's what we need. I believe we're in a time right now where we have the right. Remember, when we start talking about Black Wall, what happened in Black Wall Street, and what happened in Florida, with these lynchings and how the entire communities were burned down. We're talking about a time where it was illegal for an African American to get a gun. So I am going to disagree with you in this respect, because white America love its guns, and one of the reasons why it was illegal, and even new laws. I know you know this. When the Black Panthers came to the courthouse in California, laws were put in place to take the guns away from them, right? We know that they want to keep the guns away from us because we can't protect ourselves. Well, we don't have those issues anymore. We have the legal right, even in Illinois, can't believe it, to carry a gun, even if it's concealed. I believe we now are in a space in our rights where we can now start to rebuild and protect ourselves, that our leaders will not be murdered because we're standing there. I love what I saw in Georgia after Ahmaud Arbery was killed, and they went to have a peaceful, I believe it was a jog. They had armed Black militia jogging with them. I was like, oh yeah, I want to be a part of that. I want to be jogging up the street and say, yeah, come on over here if you want to. I got something for you. I want to be a part of that type of movement, because I believe we must be able to respond not only economically and politically, but also with force. When you have those that come from outside of our community to terrorize us, we must be able to protect ourselves. So brother, you barking up the right tree, and I'm telling you, we on the same page. I believe this is how we must come together. But I also will go back to this point that I keep making. You already said it. This is something they may take at least a generation to accomplish, right? What are we going to do in the meantime and between time? And this is why I will keep coming back to this. As difficult as it is to be a police officer, yes, this is a dangerous job. Yes, you do have to deal with anti-police rhetoric. The reality is we need people wearing this uniform that come from the community to police the community, just like every white community in America has. You go to any white community in America, and the police officers are from that community. So they're treated differently because they can identify and relate with one another. In our community, for some strange reason, we keep hiring people from outside our community to police us. And then we wonder why they abuse us.
No, you said we hire. That's the problem you're talking about. It's not us hiring. It's actually people from outside the community that is hiring them. Okay.
I gotta disagree with you there, but go ahead and finish your point.
Okay. Yeah. I'm clear on what it is I'm saying here. I'm saying that the people that are actually sending those officers into our community from outside of our community, and you talk about the white police officers that are in the white communities, they have relationships with them. How many of those relationships are actually fostered in our community? How many of those police officers actually, even if they don't live in the community, how many of them actually try to find out what it is that people are doing apart from a criminal activity of some sort to say, wow, let me see what's going on. So that if it is that something goes awry, and when I say go awry, there's a time for everything, right? There's a time to have a discussion. There's a time when it is that there's a need for restraint. There's a time to come with force. But every time it is that you're arguing with somebody doesn't mean it needs to end up with a decision. Do I shoot this person or throw this person in jail? Sometimes it is, do I de-escalate this thing so this person can begin to reason with this other person so they can go back to what it is that they're doing? It doesn't necessarily have to require an arrest at all. It could just be a need to actually calm the situation down so it's diffused from the potential violence and then allowed to be something that would be better than it started off being, period. It doesn't have to go anywhere else. Those relationships happen in the white communities. They'll talk to one another. Joe, come on, you know what? Look, we're going to play golf next week. Don't take this to the extent that I actually have to use something I don't want to use with you. Come on, you got to go to work, man. Come on, your wife needs you to go to work. You can't go to work if it is going to lock you up. Those kind of things don't even go into play when they come to our community at all. The first reaction is more, I'm going to use force. I'm going to use the law that I have. I'm going to lock you up because you know I can, as opposed to finding a way to, and maybe because they don't have those skills to deal with us. Maybe they don't know how to talk with us. And if that's the case, they shouldn't be assigned to our communities. There should be other people that are better equipped to articulate, communicate, and relate to what it is that we are about as a people.
Sure.
I think there's definitely going to have to be a truth to this. we are past time. I'm allowing it to go a little past time because I want you, Minister McNeal, to be able to respond, because it seems like you want to respond to what he's saying. But we are going to have to wrap this up. I do feel like there does need to be a part two to this discussion, so we can, clear some things up and maybe you can bring forth some more information. But did you have a response to Dr. Jamal?
Sure. And I'll say this, and again, I agree in large part to practically everything that's being said. But when what is said is it's not us hiring, that's just not accurate. When you look around this country in predominantly African American communities, the local government personnel are also African American. Many of these major cities throughout our country, even here in Chicago, that's an African American mayor. So these are people of political power and influence that are the last one to make these decisions on who to hire. In my department personally, many of the applicants, they were suggested to come here from the mayor, who's African American, and it's part of the reason why. I'll give you this caveat. Years ago, we did a hiring, and we got about 4 or 5 African Americans, and then all of a sudden we got an influx of white guys. It was like, why are we getting all these white guys? I don't mind 1 or 2, don't get me wrong, but why are we getting where all these white boys coming from? And we made a stink of it. Like we're in the predominantly African American community. Why do we have all these white people here? Why do we have all these white officers being hired? And they kiboshed it because we stood up and said something about it, right? So we were not the influencers or the authority figures. We just made a stink of it and went to our union to complain about it. Now, how often is that happening when you have too many that come from outside of your community? I guarantee it doesn't happen probably at all. Matter of fact, it was the only time I've ever been a part of it the whole time I've been a police officer. So I do appreciate what you said. We need people from our community policing us, but all too often we do have the decision makers who are not deciding to hire us. I also believe that is another impact of white supremacy, where we have people of color who don't believe they're as credible if they don't have somebody white working for them. So we got some deep-rooted issues that we're dealing with that are much more deeper than the surface could ever imagine.
I don't disagree with that.
Well, gentlemen, we're going to have to wrap this up. I think we need a part 2. So if you guys are down, then, let me know and we'll schedule it. But we definitely need to further this conversation because this is deep. We're touching on things that most people are not really talking about right now. And I want more information. I'm sure other people that are watching and listening would like more information as well. So thank you so much, Mr. McNeal, for coming on and sharing with us. And thank you, Dr. Aaron Jamal, for coming on and sharing your views as well. So everybody that is watching, please remember to embrace the perfect design in which God has made in you. And everybody have a good night. And we will see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. God bless.
God bless.